11th. We're going to do some of the preliminaries, get those out of the way, and then let our special guest, Senator SIFTON, address us today. So, Christine, why don't you go ahead and give us the Treasurer report.
Okay, as of today, we have $822.92 in the bank, but there is a donation through Act Blue that has not hit the bank yet. So we'll have a little bit more than the $822.92.
Okay, thanks, Christine.
And I was at the bank or the post office where we receive these things, and it hasn't shown up yet. So I'll go keep checking this week.
Was that the $100 donation?
Yeah, it was, but Time Act Blue takes their part out of it. It ends up as $97.02. But
Okay.
I only give what's actually in the bank, so.
Okay, Marty, I don't think we have any minutes, do we? The recordings are serving, and I should have mentioned that this Zoom session is being recorded like we always do, and the recording is put out to mopag.net, mopag.net, if you need to access the recording. So I think our recordings are pretty much serving as our minutes, Marty, unless you have anything you want to offer in that regard.
I'd rather not, but
Okay.
but I will. No, I just saw my handwritten copy about 10 minutes ago when getting my papers ready for this, and I apologize for not that. I will get minutes sent to you this time.
Not a problem. Okay, does anybody have any announcements before Senator SIFTON speaks? No announcements?
I've got one.
Okay, Glenn?
I am on the St. Louis County Council Redistricting Commission, and we are going to be having meetings starting later this month. When there are public meetings, I'll send it to Mopag and some other groups. It's going to be important that we get Democrats to these public meetings because we know the Republicans are going to send rabble rousers. We need to make sure we have sane people at these meetings besides the other kind. And as those dates get determined, the Republicans aren't playing well with others. Two of the people they nominated for the commission can't serve because they're elected officials. One of their replacement people can't serve because she's also an elected official. And they have been a problem. For example, at our organizational meeting, we spent about 30 minutes debating whether a quorum was going to be 9 or 10 people out of 14.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. When are those coming up?
Sometime, one later in September, one October, one November. We have to have our lines in to the county by December 2nd. We hope to do it a few days before that. But the Republicans are already making noises about whatever thing we come up with, taking it to court anyway, so.
Okay, thanks. Anything else?
Just a question for Glenn. Which boundaries will they be determining?
The county council districts.
The council district,
Right,
among other?
Basically dividing the St. Louis County's 1 million people by 7. However, we're trying to avoid some of the mistakes of the last couple of redistrictings as trying to make the lines cleaner and trying not to split any municipalities, things like that. We want to have lines that make sense and keep what they call communities of interest together more. One thing it looks like from the data we have already, St. Louis County is probably going to wind up out of 7 council districts, 3 of them being majority minority, 2 majority African American and 1 majority minority due to African Americans, Asians, and Hispanics. So it'll be a different look than what you have now in the council, as far as how the lines are drawn. And except for the rivers, we're going to try to get rid of all those zigzaggy lines in the middle. We can't do anything about the river boundaries, but we're going to do what we can on the interior lines.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, I am very pleased that Senator SIFTON has agreed to join us today and can be here today. He was a state rep for the 96th district in South County in 2011 through 2013, and then served 8 years as state senator for the 1st district, where Senator Beck is today. Before elected office, he worked in the Missouri Attorney General's office, and he has fought against Missouri becoming a right-to-work state and for women's rights, and basically for many of the issues that progressives care about. He now practices law at Onder Law on environmental cleanup litigation. Please welcome Senator Scott SIFTON.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve, and everybody. It is especially a pleasure to be visiting with this group today because I can say I was there in just about the beginning as this group was becoming a thing some time ago. I remember the meetings at the St. Louis County Library there, the branch at Lindbergh and 40. I think somewhere in the deep recesses of my closet, I might actually have a t-shirt from this organization. I seem to recall Rhea Kleeman and Bob Burns and Diane being involved with getting those t-shirts. I did not have a chance to pull it out for today. In hindsight, I probably should have worn it, but I have it. And you know, and I know this is an intimate group, but just in looking at the faces on the Zoom, I see two things that warm my heart. I see some very familiar faces, and I see some totally unfamiliar faces, and I'm really happy for both of those things. You got folks in this group that have been at it for a long time, making a difference in St. Louis County, and it's good to see that along the way you've got some folks that weren't involved when this was starting up a long time ago. So it is impossible for me on this day to refrain from talking about not the terror attacks of September the 11th, 2001. And everybody has their own personal story about their experience that day and what that terrible day meant to them. But for me, there's a family tie. My father was a New Yorker. He grew up on the Upper West Side, bit of a street urchin. He actually started smoking at age 9. Finally quit in his 50s, but you did not want to shoot billiards with my father if money was involved, and he definitely had New York City street smarts, and ultimately wound up getting his MBA at Columbia University in the neighborhood where he grew up. But when he was a young adult, the trade towers were being built, and he got to look down into the two very large empty pits as construction was beginning, and got to see the towers be built. And a few years after they were destroyed, I was with his brother and his brother's partner, and the mother of my children, and we collectively looked down into those same pits again, and just felt it was just a very poignant, very moving thing for us. Not pleasant in the least, of course. It was hard, and my father's brother was still living in the New York area when the attacks happened. Still, actually, we just visited them there a few weeks ago. And in fact, I was in late July. I was able to get the kids away to New York City to see it with their own eyes for the first time. And I have to tell you, there is nothing quite like seeing your children react to the sight of the New York City skyline when they're seeing it for the very first time. We were able to hit some of the sites. We were able to see Dave and Steve, but we were also able to get down to ground zero. And my children were able to look into the same recessed pits that are now the memorial for the towers. And what strikes me the most 20 years later is the jarring contrast between how united we all were as a people in the aftermath of those attacks and how seemingly impossibly divided we have become since. I mean, the juxtaposition of where we were as a nation September the 11th, 2001 versus January 6th, 2021 is just jarring to me. And I don't think there's anybody that claims to have all the answers for how we get back to that point. I would certainly hope it wouldn't be the kind of force majeure that brought us there in the first place back in 2001. But it is my hope that somehow, despite all that divides us today, between just the fact that somehow wearing masks in a pandemic is controversial, or getting the vaccine in a lethal pandemic is controversial, to people who maintain with a straight face that the outcome of the last election could possibly be in doubt, and then all of the policies that divide us, what just happened with the Texas law going into effect, and what might happen with Roe next June. There's just so much right now, almost daily, Afghanistan, everything. If it's not one thing, it's another that divides us as a nation. And it is my hope that we are able to find a way past that in the years ahead. I have no illusions as to whether that's going to be easy. I don't even assume it's possible. But I would like to see us at a place much closer to where we were as a nation in the wake of 9/11 than where we find ourselves now. With that, I say this somewhat euphemistically, I have encountered no more unifying figure in Missouri politics than Eric Greitens, because he unified Republicans and Democrats in the Missouri legislature against him in ways that you might not even realize. And the perspective of somebody who was actually in the room when some of these things went down, I think you'd be, on one hand, surprised at the extent to which there was unity on the question of whether Greitens should remain as governor. And I think in some ways we can all be proud of the bipartisanship that was expressed in that effort. That said, he's back, or trying to make a comeback. And I think that the Republican field is going to be his to lose. The polling that we've seen to this point makes that very clear. There will be a lot said about him in connection with this primary. I prefer, look, you've got the personal scandal, you've got the dark money scandals, but you've also got what he did as governor. I mean, he cut school bus funding by $10 million. He cut aid to nursing homes by far more than that. He eliminated the state's technology corporation fund, which is an incubator for new businesses. He also effectively zeroed out Missouri's low-income housing tax credit program, and that's just riffing a few things off the top. He was an absolutely terrible governor as a matter of policy, as well as comportment, and what he did and how he did it. That being said, of course, in politics, it is not enough to say who we are against. We have to let people know who we are and what we stand for. And I want to take some of your time this afternoon to talk about that from my point of view. Many of you know my story, some of you don't. A little bit more than a decade ago, I was at a crossroads personally. I had at that point served for 9 years on the Afton Board of Education, including a couple terms as board president. I had also been quite involved with the deacons at my church and had chaired that organization for a couple of years as well. And we were starting a family, and I, at that point, had been a partner in my law firm for a few years. At that time, it was Blackwell Sanders, but had the choice of doubling down on my law practice or continuing in public service. And what really swayed it for me was what happened to our backyard neighbors, the folks that shared a backyard fence line with us. Our backyard backed up to theirs. There was a chain link fence that divided the two. They were a 3-income family. The father had 2 jobs. His night job was as a cook in one of the hotels, I believe. And I honestly forget what his day job was, if I ever knew it. It's been quite some time. But the mother was a teacher. And at that point, it was very early in what would become the subprime foreclosure crisis. And things were moving quickly. The foreclosures had not bottlenecked at that point. And so from the time the mother lost her job as a teacher to the time they were foreclosed on and had to move out was under 6 months. And I remember the day they moved out. It was, I think it was a Saturday, if I recall correctly. Their 2 boys were playing in the backyard, and they were a little bit younger then than my children are now. They maybe kindergarten and 2nd grade or 1st and 3rd grade. They were playing on their swing set in the last hours that it would be their swing set. And I remember looking out my living room window and watching them just playing in their backyard for the last time, and wondering how that was going to impact them in the years ahead, wondering if those kids were going to have a backyard to call their own while they were still young enough to enjoy one, or a swing set of their own while they still had an enthusiasm for playground equipment. Because whatever mistakes their parents had made, if any, it certainly wasn't that they didn't work hard enough, and it certainly wasn't the children's fault. But I think there's no question that it was going to impact the kids for many, many years to come. And I say that because I could relate. I was 15 when the same thing happened to my family. My father, after getting his MBA at Columbia University, wound up in management at Trans World Airlines, where he stayed for more than a decade. When Carl Icahn, a corporate raider, moved in to buy TWA for the purposes of destroying it, my father and one of the pilots led the employee buyout effort to try to block Icahn, and they failed. My father landed on his feet at a different airline, Republic. If you've ever heard of it, it hasn't been in a while because it merged out of existence less than a year later. My father was literally on the wrong side of first a hostile takeover and then a friendly merger inside of the Reagan 80s, inside of 1 year in the Reagan 80s. Again landed on his feet at DST, but was hired to do a particular project. And as he says, he committed the cardinal sin of completing his project as the recession of the late 80s, early 90s was beginning. And he was actually given generous severance. He was given 6 months to find a job. We had 6 months to try to sell the house, and the economy had seized up so badly at that point that in 6 months, the combined number of job offers and offers to buy the house was 0. And my family was caught. So my parents turned over the keys to the bank of the home that I grew up in for a decade. My parents went bankrupt. We lost the family minivan, and at age 15, I became a waiter and a dishwasher and a buffet attendant and a cashier. My parents found work in different industries as well. My father became an 18-wheeler driver. My mother did work in clothing retail and special needs daycare. And even through all that, we were certainly much more fortunate than most. Although less than a year later, we had landed in rental housing. And less than a year later, I came home from high school one day to find my mother sobbing over a notice from the landlord to vacate the premises. And my family ended up having to move twice involuntarily inside of a year. And I will say, there's still more to be seen in terms of what happens with the eviction moratorium, but I am grateful to Congresswoman Cori Bush for what she did to buy millions of families some more time through all of this, because I know what it's like to have to move when it's not your choice to move. From there, my story was one of great fortune. Was admitted to Truman State University on scholarship, made it into a nationally ranked law school at the University of Michigan, and was hired into Blackwell Sanders' St. Louis office and wanted to give back. So the local high school did not have a debate team for me to help out with, but they did have a mock trial team. And so I got involved as the volunteer attorney coach for the Afton High mock trial team. One thing led to another, and I was encouraged to run for school board a couple of years later after having worked on passing a tax levy to fix up district facilities and improve teacher pay. So ultimately, obviously, I decided to stay in public service. In 2010, Congressman Russ Carnahan encouraged me to run for State House. We managed to hold the North Lemay South Afton seat on a day when Democrats lost 17 seats in the Missouri House of Representatives. We held an open seat. After that, I was recruited to run for state Senate and had to take on Jim Lemke, a very capable campaigner and incumbent Republican in 2012. And to give you a sense of how competitive the South County district is, which most of you have some sense for, but at that time, the South County seat was one that Democrats had held by a couple hundred votes in 2004. But in the blue Obama wave year of 2008, we actually lost the seat by 36 ballots out of 90,000. And there are a lot of groups that I talked to where there are more than 36 people in the room. We managed to unseat Lemke by 0.7 of a percentage point, which didn't sound like much, but it was actually the most that anybody had won by in that seat in this century to that point. And I believe I'm the only Democrat to defeat a full-term incumbent Senate Republican in the last 30 years in Missouri. We pulled it off. 4 years later, they had spent nearly $1 million against us in 12. 4 years later, they spent more than $1 million. And we had the Trump wave to contend with, but we were able to hold on to the seat. Every other Democrat in the state that had $1 million spent against them that year lost. We were able to survive. And in the legislature, I fought as hard as I could. We were badly outnumbered, as you all know. But I was not shy to filibuster against bad Republican legislation. We stayed up through the night many times, including against SJR 39, which was an anti-marriage equality bill. I filibustered various anti-choice bills into the early morning hours. Got many of them laid over, killed many of them. Couldn't stop them all. Would have if I could have. Fought long into the night on the employment discrimination bill that Eric Greitens wound up signing. Missouri's employment discrimination laws are now about the weakest in the country. We did everything we could to stop it. But at about 3 a.m., it was down to just 2 filibusterers, myself and Senator Kiki Curls, and you need 3. But I mixed it up with the Republicans on right to work, on paycheck deception, on prevailing wage, on choice, on LGBT equality, on voter ID and voting rights. I actually negotiated the bill. I was one of 4 Democratic conferees on the bill that gave us vote by mail for the first time in the state ever for the presidential election in 2020. It was a one-time deal. We'll see if we're able to get it again for 22. I'm hoping we will. But I've fought as hard as I know how, both in the field, working to persuade voters in a tough district, and in the Capitol, working to fight for what we believe in. And I'll do the same as the United States Senator. We need the PRO Act. I am hopeful that we'll get a lot done on infrastructure here in the weeks ahead, but whatever is left to be done in the next Congress, I will be happy to pick up and run with. We need to protect Roe, and you may have seen, and I've never been a bomb thrower per se in the political arena, but I'm not somebody who says lightly that it's time to get rid of the filibuster and add 2 seats to the Supreme Court. But folks, that's, in my view, that's what we're going to have to do to save Roe versus Wade at this point, given the vote that we just saw with Texas, and given how we got here. I mean, Mitch McConnell stole the Scalia seat, which should have gone to Merrick Garland. And you know, the excuse was, well, there's an election coming up. We can't confirm Garland. But then when Justice Ginsburg died, it was, well, there's an election coming up, so we've got to move on Coney Barrett. Absolute hypocrisy, and it's going to have devastating consequences for women in this country for generations to come, I fear. And we have a limited window of time to do something about it, and we must. That and voting rights in particular, we've got to move on before I get to the Senate. I want to take some of your questions in a minute here, but the last thing I want to talk about is where I think we really are as Democrats here in Missouri, because I know how hard the last 4 cycles have been. I have been knocking on doors with you. I have been making phone calls with you. I have been going to meetings with you. We have all been here working on it. Many of us through all of the last 4 cycles that have been varying shades of awful. You know, we got swept at the statewide level for the first time ever in 2016. We got swept harder in 2020. And between those 2 races, we lost Senator McCaskill. It's been about as lousy a run as you can possibly imagine in Missouri for Democrats. There's really no sugarcoating it. That said, if you look at the hard number of ballots cast in the statewide race in 2018, go to the Secretary of State's website, go to the election tab, pull up election results, and select the November 2018 midterm election. And if you add the votes Claire McCaskill received to the votes Nicole Galloway received, and you compare them to the votes that Hawley and McDowell received, what you will see is that in 2018, at the statewide level, Democrats received 49.997% of the ballots that went either red or blue. Said another way, 706 voters in the entire state were the difference. If 706 people who voted Hawley and McDowell had instead voted McCaskill Galloway, on balance, Democrats would have had more ballots cast for their candidates in the 2018 statewide race than the Republicans. Now, it's not an apples to apples comparison as we look ahead to 2022, but it you know, that was Trump's first midterm. That will be Biden's. On the other hand, I think it's fair to say Eric Greitens and even Eric Schmidt and even Billy Long and Vicky Hartzler and Mark McCloskey, all of their candidates are viewed more negatively going into this cycle than Josh Hawley was going into that cycle. I think that is absolutely fair to say. The opportunity is there for us. It won't be easy, but what I am here today to ask you to do is not only support my campaign, scottsifton.com. You can find us, volunteer sign up, you can donate there, but to continue doing what you're doing to help elect Democrats here in the St. Louis region. We have some great opportunities. We've made some great gains. We don't have congressional lines yet, but I don't think Ann Wagner's getting any more comfortable as we've gone here. We're going to have to make sure that we hold the state Senate seat that Jill Shoup will be term limiting out of. And we may have some other opportunities for pickups on the House and Senate map. And I look forward to working right alongside you to help make Missouri blue again. It can be done, and together we can do it. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think most people know that Trump only won the 2nd congressional district by about 105 votes. Very, very slim margin. Okay, let's start with Susan then. Susan?
Hey, I was glad to hear you make a remark about getting rid of the filibuster. I would not want to send a Democratic senator from Missouri who was not going to support getting rid of the filibuster. But I wanted to ask you, if you were in the Senate today, where would you stand on the president's $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill? that is raising some controversy?
I'd be a yes vote. I think we need to move forward on it. There's of course the two bills. There's the smaller package, which is the bipartisan package, and then there's the one that's in the budget bill. We need to do both of them. The smaller bill does a lot of good things as well, of course, but particularly when it comes to the environment and green energy, the smaller bill is one that does a lot more what I would call traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges, which we do need. Most of the green energy and carbon curtailment, if you will, features are in the larger bill. So if we get only the smaller bill but not the larger one, we perpetuate the status quo by and large on emissions. It takes both to move the needle in the way we need to on cutting emissions. There's also a lot of other good things, including K-12, well, pre-K-12 actually, and higher education in the larger bill, and the family leave, child tax credit, all that. There's a lot of good stuff in that we need to pass as well.
Okay, I'm going to go to a chat question from Christina. I'll call this the $64,000 question. What is your campaign strategy for the red parts of Missouri?
For the red parts of Missouri?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing I can tell you is that we're going to hit 114 counties at least once, and hopefully more than once. We're going to get everywhere, and people are going to hear from us. We have, there are different kinds of red areas in Missouri. I'm going to start with rural policy. The first thing I'll say about that is I think the infrastructure bill will help. I mean, roads and bridges matter everywhere, and that includes rural Missouri. There's also something on the order of $300 million for rural broadband in the bill, and that's something that we need. And I'm hopeful that people will see that with the Biden administration we're finally moving on that, and I think that will help sway some outstate voters. The other thing I'll say, and that we won't be afraid to communicate on, is agricultural land use regulation. And let me give you my personal background on that. So in 2013, there was an effort to get the Freedom to Farm amendment on the ballot in 2014. And I had some concerns about that effort. And myself and the Democratic leader at the time, Jolie Justice, wound up being the last two holdouts on that. Another Democratic senator had gotten some compromises on animal rights, but we found ourselves across the table from a state senator by the name of Mike Parson, who was handling that piece of legislation. And the last concession that we got out of then Senator Parson on the Freedom to Farm was preserving local government's ability to regulate agricultural land use in their community, whether at the county level or at the municipal level. Said another way, can't have a CAFO here unless the locals are okay with it. And it wasn't going to protect against all CAFOs, but at the very least, it was going to make sure that no community was going to get one if their elected leadership didn't want one. And we got that. 6 years later, once governor, Governor Parson took that back and stripped it out legislatively. I believe it was Senate Bill 391. And again, I was one of the last holdouts on that. Senator Jill Shoup was able to get some environmental protections into the bill. I made an effort to force foreign owners of Missouri farmland to divest their holdings and sell their Missouri farmland to Americans. That amendment failed on a party line vote. Every Democrat in the state was against, or in the state Senate was against foreign ownership of Missouri farmland. Every Republican in the state Senate was for it. But we did our best and we tried. But we'll be talking about all of those issues outstate and more. I mean, access to healthcare, Medicaid is a big issue in rural Missouri. K-12 education is a huge issue in rural Missouri. And with my school board background, that's something I can speak to at great length. So there's a lot to talk about outstate. There's some other red parts of the state as well. And you know, as I view it, the redder parts of the suburbs for a long time have been migrating in our direction. And frankly, I think I'm the kind of candidate who's proven I can move the needle with persuadable suburban voters. I've done it in South St. Louis County, and as it happens, I grew up in a part of the state in the Kansas City Northland that's very similar. It's been getting bluer, and so part of the strategy for 2020 needs to be to continue moving the needle in persuadable suburban communities. St. Charles County, Jefferson County, Blue Springs, Lee Summit, Kansas City Northland, and Springfield, places like that, where we've been making gains and need to continue them. Second Congressional District fits that as well. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question here in the chat from Ray Cummings with NEA. A lot of rural hospitals have closed under Republican leadership. Do you see that as a possible issue?
Absolutely, no question. And closely related to that, of course, is the Republicans' unwillingness to fund the Medicaid expansion that voters voted for, because it's our failure to expand Medicaid over the last 8+ years that it is the single biggest reason why we're seeing so many rural hospitals close. But not just rural hospitals. I mean, we have had consolidations and closures in suburban and urban healthcare institutions as well. It's not just outstate that our failure to expand Medicaid has hurt us in terms of access, but it's absolutely a huge issue for our state.
Okay, Ross Hunt has a question.
You're muted, I think.
Unmute.
I'm unmuted now. Thanks for coming, Scott. Appreciate your being with us. I have a question about universal pre-K. My understanding is that is a part of the $3.5 trillion infrastructure package. But I know that a criticism that's often been lofted at the Head Start program was that the teacher training was not what it needed to be for the people who were working with the Head Start kids. And the outcome research on Head Start indicates that it did not do as well as everyone expected it to do. So my question is, what is in the new plan? How are we going to get teacher training ramped up for universal pre-K? And how are we going to address outcome analysis?
So let me answer the last part of that question first. You know, a lot of that's going to be done by state education departments. And in my view, as much of this as possible ought to be done through local districts. And I'm not, look, there are conflicting points of view on Head Start, but I don't necessarily see making pre-K universal nationwide as necessarily a Head Start first or Head Start only approach. I think that is, you know, at least looking at what's being done in Missouri on the pre-K level, an awful lot of this is being done simply through local school districts. In fact, Afton as an example, I mean, we had an ECE program that was jointly operated with the Lindbergh School District. Lindbergh pulled the plug on it, and so as a board, we found ourselves having to recreate an ECE program from whole cloth, and we were able to do it. It was frankly a bit of a crisis that a new superintendent had to deal with, and it took a year or two to get ourselves, really a little longer than that, to get ourselves to where we wanted to be, but ultimately we were able to do it. That being said, I'm always careful not to go beyond the extent of my own knowledge. And I have to say that your question is going to cause me to look a little bit deeper into the details on the what's been called the reconciliation package on the pre-K piece, because my familiarity with how that is intended to be effectuated is not what it needs to be to answer your question as well as I'd like to be able to. So, and I apologize for that. I do my best, but I'm not gonna wing it when I haven't seen the information that I need to in order to answer your question as well as I'd like.
Well, I haven't seen much in the news media about that aspect of that packaging.
But I'll say this. We got to do it well. I mean, studies show it's absolutely critical. I mean, it makes a huge difference. I mean, and you know, it's kind of a cliche, but you know, the state of California decides what they need to do with prison construction based on third grade reading levels. I mean, there's an argument to be made in most cases, most of the time, we win or lose the battle by age 9. If kids are not reading on grade level at that age, the odds that they ever will be drop precipitously. And that's not an indictment of what teachers in higher grades are doing. They're working as hard as they can to lower that statistic as much as possible. But pre-K is extremely crucial. And you know, I'll tell you again, having sat on a school board that had to recreate a pre-K program from whole cloth, you know, one of the things our board demanded was, you know, we want to see the curriculum. Show us I mean, we're from Missouri. Show us the curriculum. We get it. You know, these are you know, 4-year-olds, but we want a curriculum. This is not daycare. You know, that's not what this is. That's not what it's intended to be. And we felt quite strongly about that, and I'm really proud of what Afton did on that.
Yes, and professionalized staff.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ross.
I was just adding, and professionalized staffing.
Okay, Glenn.
Glenn. In recent years, the divide within the Republican Party between the conservative caucus and the just plain crazy Republicans seems to be a point of friction in Jefferson City. Do you have any idea which side the conservative caucus is going to come down in the Republican primary against you?
That's a great question. And to be clear, the conservative caucus is a group of Republican state senators. There may be a House Republican analog to it at this point as well. Originally, there were 6 members of the conservative caucus. One of those original 6 has dropped out, but I think they added a couple as well. What we are seeing is a similar phenomenon in Missouri that has become more and more clear in recent years to what we saw in Kansas starting in about the early to mid 1990s. The state of Kansas at around that time became what I call a 3-party state. You had Democrats and you had very conservative Republicans, and then you had less conservative Republicans. And on any given issue, the day was going to be won by whoever had 2 of those 3 groups. So, and Missouri had been inching toward that similar dynamic for a long time. But with the advent of a formal conservative caucus about 3 years ago, that has now really cemented itself. And I'll tell you that as Democrats, you know, having Republicans with sometimes opposing viewpoints in the legislature is not always a bad thing. You know, when they have 24 and you have 10, what you cannot have is the 24 elephants all herding up on you on a given issue, because if they are unified against the Democrats and inclined to go after things, that's when bad things happen for progressive principles. On the other hand, you know, there have been some reasonable pro-job measures, including specifically on economic development and sometimes on education, that sort of the management wing of the Republican Party and Democrats have been able to get on the same page with. And so there have been times where there have been times where 6 conservative Republicans were filibustering something that they didn't like, and the Democrats and the other Republicans were working together to break the conservative filibuster. And you know, it's funny when you work together to do something like that, and then you turn around the next day and there's some sharp part of the Republican agenda that there's a pressure to move on. You tend to find yourself in a stronger position having worked together on other things. And you know, no apologies for that, right? I mean, we being outnumbered more than 2 to 1, we don't apologize for being effective. And at the same time, there have been a number of issues that sort of the management-oriented Republicans have wanted, that both Democrats and conservative Republicans objected to. And we don't apologize for killing those bills either and getting help doing it. So not to say that it's all divide and conquer, but you know, when you're in the minority, and frankly, when you are one of 10 Democrats in a state of 6 million people, that is, for most intents and purposes, the only line of defense against bad Republican ideas, whether it's been under Greitens or Parson, you have got to do whatever you have got to do. And no apologies made. And I'll tell you that that there were Democrats, not me, but there were Democrats who became very adept at keeping their finger on the pulse of both what the conservative caucus was thinking and what the rest of the Republicans were thinking. And you know, there were some Democrats that would bring 10 Republicans to every fight with them. And you know, when we're operating on such a thin margin and with so much at stake, and with the possibility that we could get rolled on absolutely anything at any time, the danger being so great, I don't apologize for doing what we've had to do to protect progressive principles in this state. Given what we've been up against, and that we're now 6 years into having a Republican governor, I'd say we've done a whole lot better than I might have guessed. A lot of things haven't passed. A lot of the things that have passed were unconstitutional when they passed. Again, no apologies. You know, if you have to have you know, something terrible pass, it may as well be something that's going to get struck down by the courts. You know, we have done our best to protect the values that the people on this Zoom call and so many others stand for. Exploiting divisions in the Republicans, you know, we don't apologize for. In terms of where they're going to line up in the U.S. Senate primary, hard to say. The head of the conservative caucus is somebody that's quite tight with Greitens. I'll say that. I think that most of the not conservative caucus Republicans are of the view that they will take anybody but Greitens. And we'll just see how things unfold. Their field is pretty divided, though.
Okay, Susan?
I understand you have considerable expertise about public education, and you know it's important in rural Missouri. When you were in the state legislature, I recall you filed a number of bills about public education every year, and that included in those bills was the expansion of charter schools into every school district in St. Louis County. If you're going to, if you become our United States Senator, will you be promoting legislation or supporting legislation in the Senate that would expand charter schools in the country?
No, and I never have. And let me tell you, I think I know what you're referring to. Just to be very clear, I oppose charter expansion within St. Louis County and always have. That being said, right after the end of session in 2013, the Missouri Supreme Court issued a ruling on school transfer policy that caused a substantial caused some school districts to go bankrupt, and resulted in a bit of a mess in a lot of ways. And there was a general consensus, bipartisan and across the state, that we needed a better, more specific school transfer law. And it was part of that, some Republicans made it very clear that it was just going to need to include the air quotes education reform crowd. We're going to want to get something out of it. I don't believe I filed any version that included charter expansion. If there
I've got that bill on my
Yeah.
computer.
if there was, it would have been the 2014 bill. And what you would have seen is that there were about a half dozen Democrats and Republicans who all filed the exact same language. I am not a supporter.
Yeah,
I'm not a supporter of charter expansion. And to be very clear, in the end, and it took 6 years, we ultimately got the transfer issue addressed without expanding charters. And and I'll also say that I killed charter expansion several times in the Senate. And when I left the Senate, it had not made it into law in Missouri. And again, we needed to get transfers done. And I was working to try to make that happen. I'm very proud of the fact that charter expansion did not happen on my watch in the Senate. Unfortunately, we had some bad scholarship ESA language that passed this past year once I was out of the Senate, but I worked cooperatively to kill that several times. So just to be very clear, I oppose charter expansion and always have.
I'm glad to hear that. But I also have a copy of that bill and I know what's in it.
Yeah.
And I know that in rural Missouri, there is considerable opposition to the expansion of charter schools in their school districts. So this is an issue that may come up for you. And I would say go back and read that bill because you may have to defend yourself.
It was a bipartisan effort to address, frankly, a crisis on transfer issues, but it was never something that I wanted to see happen. And it's something that I helped stop on a great many occasions.
Ron Zager.
Yeah, Scott, how important is it that the Democratic candidate for Senate from Missouri have extensive experience in the legislature at any level?
So I go to great pains in conversations like this not to take shots at any other Democratic candidates that are running. And I don't want to answer that question in a way that might be construed in that manner. As it happens, of the 5 Democrats that have announced that I'm aware of, I am the only one with prior legislative experience, and I am the only one that's ever won an election, that as far as I know anyway. I'm not going to take anything away from the other 4. I will say that I do think having served in the legislature will help me in the U.S. Senate be more effective from day one. And here's something that I think is very important for people to understand about that. Josh Hawley is number 100 out of 100 United States senators in the power rankings, so to speak. He has the least stick of anybody in that chamber. Democrats, of course, are furious with him for the insurrection, and Republican leadership is almost equally furious with him for the insurrection. He was given a red light when he made it clear he was going to challenge the election results in the U.S. Senate. He was warned that was not something that Republican leadership in the Senate wanted to see happen, and he did it anyway. He ran the red light and got into a wreck at the next intersection. Obviously it blew up in his face. Here's why that obviously matters for a lot of reasons, but here's why that really matters as Missourians decide who's going to sit in the other seat. Missouri's top 3 industries are tourism, agriculture, and transportation. But federal investment in Missouri in many forms, whether you're talking about defense or other industries, is very close to breaking the top 3. And that matters to the state of Missouri for jobs, for economic growth. don't think for one second that if we get somebody in that second seat who's kind of cut from Hawley's cloth, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, who is not there to do the blocking and tackling and sort of the unsexy business of governing and just watching out for Missouri's interests and taking care of Missouri, we will get fleeced by the other 49 states in an eye blink. And it really, really matters that we have somebody who is there, not just to be the senator from Missouri, but to be the senator for Missouri. And watching out specifically for our state's interest in a way that isn't even really partisan or ideological. Hawley can't do it and won't do it. It is essential that we have somebody in that second seat who can and will, or it will mean bad things for everybody in our state.
I'm going to go to a chat question from Don Logue. What do you anticipate to be the major differences in messaging between you and the eventual Republican candidate?
I think that a year from now, it will be very clear. Two things. I think we're going to have a very strong economy to run on, and I think President Biden is going to get a lot of credit for that. I think that we are going to push past the pandemic, and I think the sort of economic restart that we have seen, but it's been somewhat truncated with Delta variant and everything that's happening with COVID now. I think you will see that really hit its stride in the months leading up to the election. And so I think Democrats are going to be able to run on the economy because I think it's going to be going great guns. I think there will still be challenges in the supply chain and in the labor supply. We've got more job openings in this country right now than we have people looking for work. But we also have a lot of people looking for work. But I think messaging, Democrats are going to be in a very strong position to run on the economy. The other thing that I think is going to be foremost on people's mind is Roe versus Wade and the right to choose. Depending on what the Supreme Court does in June, I think Republicans are likely to find themselves a victim of their own success. I think the Supreme Court is going to take abortion policy to a place that the vast majority of Americans do not support and will not accept. And I think there's going to be a very substantial backlash to that. So I think those will be the two brightest points of contrast, but there will of course be many others.
Yeah, the abortion issue and the laws that are being passed, the Texas law in particular, it's already leading to a likely Democrat governor to be elected in Virginia. Okay, there's a question from, actually a couple questions from Patrick Charles. Do you support statehood for DC and Puerto Rico?
Yes and yes. Yes.
And Patrick, maybe your question was already answered on this. He asked, was your opposition to charter school expansion limited to St. Louis County?
No, I'm opposed to charter school expansion in general. I would not support expansion of charter schools within our state.
Okay, I have a question I'd like to ask. In the book, Why Nations Fail, the authors make the case that the most important factor in whether nations succeed or fail is the extent of economic inequality. And in my view, a lot of the divisions and the troubles that we are seeing are the result of 40 years of rising economic inequality in this country. Sometimes it's easy to...
Oh, you froze up there. Are you there?
Sometimes it's easy to see the results, and sometimes it's not easy to see the consequences. I'm sorry, I have an internet connection is unstable, sorry. Sometimes it's not so easy to see the consequences of this economic inequality. Sometimes it's obvious. So as a senator, what would you do to fix it?
Sure. Well, the answer is there's a lot of things that we need to do, and it's not just income inequality itself. It's also the historical effects of systemic racism, which we've had in this country for centuries. and we need to attack all of the above. I think one of the simplest and in some ways most powerful ways, not per se to address income inequality, but to address poverty and to help mitigate income inequality, is simply a much stronger minimum wage. It ought to be $15. That alone would lift millions of families out of poverty, or at least help do it. And it's something that we ought to do, and that's something that I've fought for in the legislature. I actually introduced the amendment that resulted in the city of St. Louis being able to, well, any city in the state could have increased its minimum wage beyond the state minimum wage under the amendment that I added. The city of St. Louis happened to be the one that actually did it. And that policy change in the city resulted in something like $20 million in the pockets of minimum wage workers in the city of St. Louis. And when the Republican legislature clawed that back and forced them to lower their minimum wage again, over my effort to block the nuclear option, we forced them to PQ us on that. A lot of those workers kept their gains. And I think that's one piece of it, on one end. On the other end, there are provisions in the $3.5 trillion package that will work on the other end, which is to say, some of the corporate taxes would increase, and individuals making more than 400,000 would increase, and that would help address income inequality as well. But I also think that both infrastructure packages will go a long way toward doing that. Also, the fiscal stimulus that will, or economic stimulus that will provide, will be considerable. It will run for longer than a decade. Those packages combined are expected to lower the federal budget deficit over 15 years because of the economic growth that will come from them. As Bill Clinton said in his farewell address, it's the rising tide lifts all boats, and let's worry about working families, and let's combat poverty, because when we do that, it grows the economy in a way that doesn't hurt anybody, including the folks at the top. But you've got to have working families who can afford to get by. You can't have families that are dealing with what my neighbors were dealing with, which was three incomes barely getting by, two incomes still not getting by, and there are too many families that are living through that in our society today. And of course, it's disproportionately people of color who are experiencing the greatest poverty rates, and in some ways are sort of bear the brunt of this the most, and we need to combat that in several ways, including police reform, but also including employment discrimination protections, which, again, there's going to be a very clear point of contrast between Eric Greitens and me on that. He signed Senate Bill 43, and I fought it to the bitter end. But employment discrimination is something we've got to get past. And unfortunately, Missouri is not where it needs to be now.
Okay, Ellen Wentz has a question.
Yeah, do you follow the Democracy Rising briefings, the messaging group?
I don't know that I'm familiar with that particular messaging group.
Okay, yeah, it's I'll put the link in the chat if anybody wants to sign up. The next one is Wednesday. They do a lot of research on how to use your words to get what you want, and messaging. So
Can you give me the name of it again, please?
Democracy Rising briefings. I learned about it on the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition email.
I'm certainly familiar with the Voter Protection Coalition.
Yes, there's hundreds of groups now that are not kind of part of it, but these are people that really research and test out messaging. So
that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are a first-rate group. You can probably Google Jiggy Geronimo. They had Eric Holder on a week or two ago, and they just put out some really excellent material on messaging. Okay, let's see, other questions. Don Logue asks, we have been fighting the war on poverty for over 50 years. What do we need to do differently from a strategy perspective?
I think we've touched on a lot of that. It's the same. It goes back to your income inequality and wealth inequality question, because it's been, that's what's been happening over the last 40 to 50 years. There's no question of it. And I think the answers are much the same. I do think the infrastructure bills will help. I think we need a stronger minimum wage. We need stronger collective bargaining rights, something I might have said a minute ago as well. And we need protections against discrimination in the workplace. And we need police reform, and also to close the school to prison pipeline, if you will, disincarceration, criminal justice reform. We need all of those things.
Scott, I have a question. I'm trying to think if there's a downside to this. Do you anticipate campaigning with the, once we're past the primaries, the 2nd congressional district candidate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll say too, in the 2020 election, the 2nd congressional district, and in the 2018 election, the 2nd congressional district was, I believe, the most heavily targeted district on both sides of the aisle. It was the area of the state that Republicans and Democrats both worked the hardest to win, and invested the most in trying to win. And I don't think that's likely to change. Of course, the district lines are going to change, and it remains to be seen what that's going to look like. And it does appear as though we'll have an incumbent Republican defending. Wagner has indicated, I think she intends to run for re-election rather than U.S. Senate. So we'll just have to see. We'll know in a couple of months, hopefully, what those lines will be. I joke that I'm one of the few people in Missouri politics right now who knows what my district lines are going to look like next year.
Any other, here's a, just for the group in general, can someone write the name of the group that was just discussed? Democracy what?
Democracy Rising Briefings. I wrote it down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
I put the link in to sign up for them. They've had Chuck Schumer on, but it's usually Wednesdays at 2:00 Central Time. Or is it 3? No, it's 2:00. Yeah. And it's every other Wednesday.
Okay, I think I got to all the questions or comments from people. Any final remarks you want to make, Scott? Or
I just want to thank you all for such great questions and for the conversation today, and for all that you have been doing for so long to help advance the progressive cause. It hasn't been easy, but we're making gains, especially in the footprint in which this group is working. And wish we had 1 million more, just like the folks on the call, and grateful for all you do.
all right. Well, thank you very, very much, Scott, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to turn to another item on our agenda, which is something I'm calling Spotlight on Ideas. And Ross Hunt, hold on one second here. So this is going to be a brief presentation on an idea in a book or whatever. A brief presentation by a person followed by questions or discussion. This month, Ross Hunt has volunteered to present on bright green lies. Okay, Ross, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. Yes, my understanding of this is the way I presented it to the board and they approved. this proposal was that it would be a 5-minute presentation, which means 2 to 3 minutes in presenting the idea, allowing 2 or 3 minutes of discussion. And the idea is to limit it so that it doesn't usurp the time that we need for the rest of the meeting. So I will try to abide by that. This is a book by Derek Jensen, who is a conservation environmentalist, and he is critical of mainstream environmentalists who are not primarily concerned, as he is, with the preservation of the natural world and of life in all of its variety, but instead preserving industrial civilization, which is rapidly destroying the very conditions that are needed in order to continue life on this planet, in his opinion. Jensen cites, for example, a 2017 study in the journal Nature. Deforestation, agriculture, and other land use changes have shrunk global biomass of plants by over 50%. Other global scale studies find that more than 50% or close to that of all insects are gone, terrestrial vertebrates gone, phytoplankton gone. Renewables, which are often proffered as the solution to global warming and and acidification of the ocean, have been oversold. It's convenient to believe that we can continue with our industrial growth policies, but renewables have significant carbon footprints themselves and carry other problems. For example, an analysis in the journal Energy Policy in 2015 looked at solar systems in Europe and found that they have a negative return on energy invested. In other words, it takes more energy being put into the system than is harvested from it. Energy used for production, transport, maintenance, and financing of solar photovoltaics in Germany and Switzerland exceeded the energy produced. Wind also has many problems. Many people are familiar with the engineering professor at Stanford, Mark Jacobson, who has presented a plan using renewables to replace fossil fuels, which of course we've got to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. Wind would require billions of tons of concrete, steel, composite materials, and would require, if we are going to meet the 2030 deadline, the construction of the equivalent of 60,000 Hoover dams, which means finding sites that are appropriate with ample wind, which is itself an enormous problem. That's not a plausible solution. Jensen criticizes Jacobson and many others in the process of the book. The correct path to take is to help the earth repair the damage that we have caused. We need to allow soils and wetlands and native forests to be restored to their natural condition in order to be able to absorb emissions from greenhouse gases. Short of a miracle energy source, we simply have to reduce our demands for industrial production. He has a number of specific solutions. I don't have time for all that. I do have criticisms. I think there's some question about the thoroughgoing nature of his analysis. Certainly it's controversial, but I've used it. So, comments and questions?
Glenn?
I'm just curious what he feels about the fact that, say, we now have LED lighting taking over. So we're getting more light with much less energy and more reliability. We're getting better refrigerators and things like that. So in other words, at the rate we're going, in 20 or 30 years, we could have more useful energy at a lower cost of energy units.
Well, he's very critical of that. And in fact, he goes into great depth in the analysis of lighting as an issue, including LEDs. And I would have to look at the book to remember his specific critique on LEDs, but he's very critical of most of these solutions. I think one of the ways that I'm most critical of Jensen et al. Is that they suggest that renewables are static as they are now. Well, they're not. They continue to improve efficiency, and there may be breakthroughs, and that's something we could put more attention into research and development in breakthroughs that would continue along the lines of an LED light bulb and other areas where we need to improve efficiency and effectiveness.
Ross, I'm wondering whether or not Republican candidates, or some of them, like Ann Wagner, are going to tip their hat towards a new concern with climate change. And if she does, it might be to offer solutions such as carbon capture technology, and which is a promising but totally unproven or uncertain as to what kind of contribution it will actually make in helping to solve our problem. Does he address carbon capture technology in his book?
He does not have an index in any of the 500 pages in his book. And
okay,
I don't recall, I have not read every word. I've read about 2/3 of the book. And I don't recall him talking about carbon capture, but I can update you next month.
I think we need to be prepared with pre-buttals, not rebuttals, but pre-buttals of what we might expect to see from Republican candidates.
Well,
any other comments? Oh, okay. Someone has posted, oh, I see, a link to Democracy Rising. Anything on fusion? Al Gerber asked, anything on fusion in the book?
I did not see anything on fusion in the book. I guess because it also is considered unproven at this time. That would be when I said short of a miracle energy source, we must reduce our demands for industrial production, and nuclear fusion would certainly be the miracle energy source that we're most in search of.
All right, thank you very much, Ross.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we pretty much covered our agenda. Are there any topics that anyone else would like to bring up at this time before we close?
Hey, Steve, I just want to mention that when people want to do a 5-minute presentation on ideas next time, they should talk to you and Susan about getting that approved prior to the meeting.
Right. If you have any topics, exactly right, Ross. You can send an email to me or Susan. You can go to mopag.net and submit it as a comment, or send it to steveandjanereed@gmail.com. And yeah, you too can present. Also, if you have any ideas for guests that you want to see or topics that you want to see addressed, this meeting is for you all. So that's what we try and do.
So,
Okay.
Steve,
Yeah.
and we've talked about this. I'm trying to I've solicited a potential presentation from a WashU group on the state of public health in Missouri as a topic. And haven't heard back. And we'll see. We'll see. That's a leading question or a title, and we'll see what kind of response we get.
Okay,
Now,
thanks, Don.
for me, that's a pretty fundamental and important question, and in some ways gets back to my question about, we've been fighting poverty for the war on poverty for 50 years. When are we going to start doing things differently? When are we going to focus on outcomes? And when you look at the news this past week, about abandoning downtown again and the square building unable to be occupied, and keep doing the same thing over and over again with the homeless. And now let's get a bigger, stronger, tougher police chief rather than focusing on the systemic issues. I mean, I condemn both parties on this. We keep throwing the same tricks without addressing the fundamental issues on a systemic, democratic basis. And healthcare is one of the crucial key points, keystones to that process.
Okay. Thank you all for being here and for all the participation. I thought it was a really great session with Scott, and gave me a clearer view about things, where he stands. And, I think it'd be great if he were our next senator. So, all right, I'm going to close it, folks. You all take care. See you next month.
Very well.
Bye-bye.